Your active debate on ramping up hydrogen production. We will be talking about how we can speed up the steel industry's transition while navigating the current unprecedented energy crisis. My name is Dave Keating. I'm coming at you live from the Euractiv studios at the heart of the EU Quarter. Now, we know that right now European consumers and businesses are facing steep increases in energy prices. The Ukraine war and the accompanying energy brinksmanship by Vladimir Putin has exposed many shortcomings in the EU's energy system, particularly the over-reliance on Russian gas. This is also causing a rethink of some EU climate policy, including the role of natural gas as a transitional energy carrier, bridging the current energy era to the future energy era. Industries relying on a mix of natural gas and hydrogen for their greenhouse gas emissions reductions are having to reconsider their investment plans. It's in this context that hydrogen has come very much into focus, given that it can be transported using some of the same infrastructure as gas. But ramping it up will require a robust EU hydrogen market, one that will be able to deliver renewable and low-carbon hydrogen in large volumes and in the shortest time frame possible. However, with currently no hydrogen economy in place and not even the basic infrastructure to deliver it to end consumers, where do we start? The European Commission has launched proposals on an EU framework to decarbonise gas markets, promote hydrogen and reduce methane emissions, which have the potential to get things moving. But what will be necessary to deliver on that promise? Today, in this hybrid event with online participants and participants here in the room, we'll be discussing the specific circumstances of the steel industry and how it can be part of this effort to ramp up hydrogen production and speed up the steel industry's transition toward net zero. What are the key requirements to create a well-functioning hydrogen market? Well, we've got some great panelists to discuss this here with us today. Next to me here we have Ruud Kempener, who's team leader for hydrogen financing and international at the European Commission's Energy Department. We have Jens Geier, center-left German MEP and member of the European Parliament's Industry and Energy Committee. We also have with us Bianca Villaprado, who is the chair of the Energy Committee at the Steel Association Eurofer and head of EU Regulatory Affairs at ThyssenKrupp Steel Europe. Unfortunately, Gunnar Grubler will be in your programs as the president of Eurofer. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it because of unforeseen circumstances, but we're very grateful that Bianca was able to step in. So then joining us online, we have Jorge Palomar Herrero, head of Green Hydrogen Develop at the Spanish electricity utility Iberdrola. And we have Catherine Bennett, SARE Research Fellow and Professor at the University of Oslo. And we will also be joined here in the room in just a moment by Rosa Puentes Fernandez, Future Energy Leader at the World Energy Council. But Ruud, let's start with you. I mentioned that the Commission has some of these frameworks in place for hydrogen. These, of course, these ideas predate the Ukraine war and the current energy crisis. But how does the Commission, what's the Commission's view on how the EU and EU policy can provide the incentives and certainty needed to ramp up hydrogen production?
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. The European Commission indeed put in place a hydrogen strategy in 2020. And this, of course, seems to be already a long time ago, but I think we're lucky we did it in 2020 because the strategy in itself already has some of the elements which I think are still very important today. And the three elements which I think I want to highlight here is that for indeed the creation of a market for renewable and low carbon hydrogen, you first of all need production. So we have quite a lot of policy proposals in the Fit for 55 package which explicitly focus on production. We're talking here about revisions of the EU emissions trading scheme. We're talking here about state aid guidelines. We're talking about the Resilience and Recovery Fund, of course for COVID, but has a big hydrogen component in it already. The second one is we need infrastructure. We need to be able to get the hydrogen from the producers to the consumers. Again, the Fit for 55 package has in it already a full-fledged proposal for hydrogen infrastructure, not only focusing on where it is, so we have policies which promote, for example, cross-border energy infrastructure, which is called like the Trans-European Network for Energy, but also regulation in terms of who owns it, who owns that infrastructure, how do we certify the hydrogen which goes through those pipelines. And the third one is, of course, consumption. It's clear to each and every one of us that both renewable and low carbon hydrogen are more expensive than the alternative which we've been using in the industry so far. So we need to promote that. And we've done that through, indeed, setting targets for 2030. Now, I think the key element that has changed, especially with the Repower EU, is that we thought 2030 targets are ambitious. But if we're now looking what happened with natural gas, it means that actually our ambitions to get rid of Russian natural gas are even more ambitious than that. So here we have set targets for 2027, actually before our 2030 targets for demand are kicking in. So I think that is one of the key elements now which we're looking at. How can we already, well before the 2030 targets that we've put in place, create these incentives for especially the steel industry to start investing in the necessary technologies to shift from coal, coke oven, to natural gas. And I think then one of the key elements there, of course, to make that happen, is to make sure that today, investment decisions which the steel industry faces, that they can be made to give that a certainty. That they don't need to wait later or a later point in time. Investment decisions of staying here, continuing to producing, that we can couple those to investment decisions about creating processes and production processes that not are only kind of viable in the short term, but are really kind of compatible with the long-term objective of this climate neutral economy that we have here in Europe.
Thanks, Ruud. And I should mention, I forgot to mention that you can ask your questions to Ruud and the other panelists by putting them into Slido. Whether you're watching online or you're here in the room, there's some QR codes on your seats. You can put in those questions to Slido. I'll get them here, and I'll put them to the panelists later on. Jens, let's turn to you. When we're looking at how energy-intensive industries can really grasp the potential here, what role do you think that hydrogen should have in energy-intensive industries? Is it a good idea to grasp these opportunities, or are there things to watch out for?
I would say that it is not less than the future of energy-intensive industry. When we look at the steel sector, and you are now producing your steel with a blast furnace, there is no alternative when you look at a zero CO2 emission. So when you're relying on electric arc, you need only, in parentheses, green energy in order to produce green steel. But when you have a blast furnace, that is common in the area of Germany where I come from, the alternative is first to blast hydrogen instead of coke inside the furnace. That already brings in a reduction of CO2 emissions, and then the next step is to have a direct reduction installment instead of a furnace. And if you run that with green gases, you end up with green steel. So when you want to keep the jobs, when you want to keep the production chain, when you want to protect the climate, and we should do that all together, then there is no alternative to ramping up hydrogen and making it green as soon as possible. The irony is, given the prices of natural gas today, green hydrogen would be absolutely compatible if we would only have it. And so there is the possibility to decarbonize the energy-intensive industry, because what I said for steel is more or less also working for the chemistry sector, for aluminum, for other non-metal, non-iron metals, and so on and so on. It is the future of the energy-intensive industry when you want to keep it.
Yeah, it's a good point in terms of how we develop that system. We'll be talking about that a little more in the discussion. Catherine, let's go to you next online. You, of course, have been looking at these issues, so you could bring us a kind of academic perspective. How how are we going to formulate this with hydrogen regulation? Where are we at with the regulation on hydrogen right now? And what trends are we seeing in terms of how governments are approaching hydrogen?
Yeah, thank you likewise for the invite and the opportunity to share some views. I think that indeed we're at a crucial time in terms of regulation of hydrogen. And because we have a small market, but we need, as you point out in the title of this event, ramp up hydrogen in the market. And as was pointed out, I think it's crucial as it is highlighted in the package put forward by the Commission in December to act both on production, transport, including conversion and storage, so the infrastructure market, but as well the commodity market. And all those different steps are following different regulatory paths. For example, we have already high ambition levels that has been increased after the Repower EU plan was adopted. And then we need to fill the gap and we need to accompany that by regulation. And that's a redesign regulation, not only for hydrogen or natural gas, but for all gases as it is envisaged. And then we need in terms of other packages, notably under the Fit for 55, to align with the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive that was newly adopted, to make sure that the commodity as well will fit into that market, that will be traded between partners and across borders. And finally, we have the financing gap that is also crucial to fill. And here we have different instruments that will be crucial to fill that gap. We have the stated framework. We have as well new instruments in terms, for example, of carbon contract for difference that could be used, and the revision of the EU ETS, but as well taxonomy, and for infrastructure, the 10E regulation that also has been mentioned. So different processes that are crucial, but I would say that the debate that we have in the next few weeks around the gas package and the gas and the hydrogen package will be crucial, accompanied by the discussion on commodity market.
Thanks. Let's turn to Rosa next. So from the World Energy Council's point of view, how important do you think hydrogen will be in the future energy mix?
Thank you very much. So I'm very sorry for just appearing in out of the blue. So I think everybody knows traffic in Brussels is crazy. I would have liked to take the metro, but that was 55 minutes, so I would never have made it. So I'm Rosa Puentes, and I'm at the World Energy Council Future Energy Leaders, which is basically the community they have created to empower young energy professionals, match them with more senior energy professionals, and try to bring together this community and try to address the main challenges. The first one that you may have heard around is about humanizing energy. And that's a very interesting one because we talk a lot about what hydrogen can do, but sometimes we forget how much hydrogen actually may change people's lives, and how do we involve local communities that are usually well located where we want to develop hydrogen, let's say Africa, let's say Chile, Brazil. So that's one of the main pillars that we are bringing together, and we have developed several reports at the World Energy Council where we are addressing this local, regional scale up. But we are also trying to find what are we call it the how-to community. So I think we have all seen a lot of what for the past years. What can we do? What can policymakers do? But now we have to move on to the how we can make it really work, and what is the real implementation of hydrogen. And hydrogen, in general, for the energy community, seems to be one of the main pivotal pillars for the decarbonization of the sector, in general, the energy sector. But it's also, although maybe a little bit controversial, not the silver bullet. There are many other vectors that need to interact with each other. And I guess some of the other panelists may agree with me that at the end of the day will be the energy system integration that will really deliver the decarbonization goals. And this is what we are trying to do from a more holistic perspective, to look for these interactions and try to understand how hydrogen can play a role in this whole system, but how can it also, interact with other vectors and build from scratch, this energy sector, without forgetting that there are other like wind, solar, but even energy efficiency that we don't talk about that often anymore, but they are still there, they're still existing, and that they're a first step before moving on to really developing hydrogen.
Makes sense. Bianca, let's go to you next. How important do you think hydrogen will be for the steel sector, speaking both from your company and from the broad steel sector's perspective? And what is needed to realize the full potential of hydrogen for the steel sector?
Yeah, the steel sector has a huge challenge in front of us to decarbonize our sector. We today, looking to the European projects that we have all in Europe, we are talking about around 60 projects to decarbonize all over Europe. This represents the potential to abate 1/3 of our direct and indirect emissions. This represents 80 million tons of CO2 per year. This is what we are talking about. But all these projects can only be implemented if we really have some of, I would say, 3 points at least that needs to be fulfilled. I would like first to echo what has been said already in the panel. But for sure, one of the most important things is that we really need the availability of this hydrogen. So we were talking about the production of the hydrogen. And connected to the production of the hydrogen, we need the legal certainty, and this is connected to the regulation. So if the regulation is not in place, if the regulation is not clear and give the legal certainty, it's really hard for companies to make investment decisions. So we have already lots of different regulations. This is already very, very tough for many to understand. But if everything is not aligned together and coherent between each other, it's really hard for companies to put those projects forward. And then another point that is really crucial, it also has been said here today, is the timely availability of the infrastructure. If the infrastructure is not in place and in a way that it's really available for all those projects, and then we are talking about projects that can be located in the coast, but we are also talking about projects that are located really in the land. Like I talked, for instance, about ThyssenKrupp, my project. We are not located in the coast. We are really depending on a pipeline to get that hydrogen to us. We don't have the land enough to construct the amount of renewable electricity that we need to really provide the amount of renewable hydrogen that we envisage. So pipelines are for sure crucial for us to achieve these decarbonization projects. I can give you some numbers because we talk about, the steel industry needs so much. Yeah, let's put a little bit in perspective. So when we talk about 2030, and then let me separate a little bit here. So we have a target as a steel industry in 2030, and we also have a target in 2050. Some companies, for instance, ThyssenKrupp, we have a 2045 target. But in general, when we talk about the steel industry, we have a 2030 target and 2050 target. And then when we look to the 2030 target, we are talking about 2 million tons of hydrogen needed. Only to produce this renewable hydrogen, we will need 94 terawatt-hour of electricity. On top of this electricity, we will need 75 additional renewable electricity connected to our sites in general. And all this represents 165 terawatts of electricity only in 2030. When I go to 2050, the numbers explode. What is 165 terawatts electricity? Because this could sound a little bit, what does this number represent? We are talking about twice the Belgium consumption in 2020. This is a lot. So when we talk about, and then I will put a little bit numbers on 2050. On 2050, we are talking about 5.5 million tons of hydrogen. Only to produce this hydrogen, we will need 234 terawatts of electricity. And on top of this, we also need 165 terawatts of electricity. So we are talking about 400 terawatts of electricity by 2050. So this is a challenge that we have as steel industry, and it's a huge one.
Yeah, I mean, that's the production challenge is really enormous. I mean, when you put it like that, 400 terawatts, that's huge. So, when we're thinking about the production challenges and the need for electricity, that's a good moment to turn to Jorge online. How important will hydrogen be for electric utilities, and where do you see things going forward in terms of the immense need?
Well, thank you for inviting me, Bertola, to be here. It's a pleasure. Well, hydrogen for utilities is key. Of course, we have to give our clients, our partners, our society, decarbonization solutions. And as we all know, electrification is the most efficient way to decarbonize, but reduce dependence on fossil fuels. But of course, hydrogen has a very important role to play. So that is why hydrogen is also key for utilities. So Repower Europe, as mentioned, is a big challenge. It's a big number now. It's 4 times what our previous commitment was. So we think there's going to be an important impact with this commitment on Repower Europe on decarbonization, but it also starts to be something important on reducing fossil fuel dependence. So thinking of these 2 aspects is why we think that renewable hydrogen is the way. Renewable hydrogen is the only one that is 100% free of CO2. It's a mature technology. Electrolysis is something that has been being used for many years. We have the challenge to scale it up, but it's a very well-known technology. I mean, the other options like carbon capture, well, it's an ongoing technology, not very mature. And also, well, the only one that will mean reducing the dependence on fossil fuels is green hydrogen produced with green renewable energy. But of course, the challenge of the renewable energy is there also. In Iberdrola, we are very much focused on renewables utility. So our ambition in hydrogen is very strong. We want to build 4 gigawatt of electrolyzer from now to 2030. We have 60 projects already under development in 8 different countries, and it's a firm commitment. We are working with partners, with off-takers, with companies on the value chain. Real alliances has been established with Fertiberia for fertilizer industry, with BP for decarbonizing the industry and build a hydrogen economy in Spain and UK, with Cummins for building electrolyzer, also the value chain. I mean, to make this a reality, and we have created reality. I mean, we have built 2 projects. One is a facility for loading, for charging buses in Barcelona, which is already, you can see, but these buses, these green hydrogen buses in Barcelona. And the other one is our 20 megawatt plant, which I think is the biggest plant now in Europe being built, that is directly connected to a fertilizer facility. So these are reality. But I want to say that we are really suffering delays when we want to boost this. And the objectives of the Repower Europe are quite ambitious, and the reality needs to happen. So when we sit with an off-taker, with a partner, to try to think on numbers, there's always the same key point, which is what is the cost of energy. So the delegated act to define what is green hydrogen, I think is, and Bianca was mentioning regulation. And I think the first point on regulation is the definition of green hydrogen. And this is key for making this a reality. We're waiting for that, because the moment you sit with someone to build something on a long-term basis, you need to know what kind of energy you will need. So this is a key point that I wanted to put on the table.
Thanks a lot, Jorge. So I want to ask you guys first about how this all fits into the geopolitical context that we're in right now. We know that the Commission came out with its Repower EU strategy, whose chief goal is to wean the EU off of Russian gas, and it is a broad rethinking. Ruud, tell us a little bit about how the Commission is thinking about hydrogen specifically on this energy security issue, because certainly I've seen hydrogen come in and out of focus over the years, and right now it's very much in focus because of the security issue. How does it play a role there for the Commission?
the Repower EU, which we published indeed in May this year, has indeed quite a different focus than the Fit for 55. And it really clear is, we're looking at 2027, how can we get rid of natural gas from Russia? The role of hydrogen actually is quite limited in that. If you look at kind of what are the key measures to reduce our gas consumption, we're talking about energy efficiency measures, which are in the order of 120, 116 BCM. If we're talking about hydrogen, it's 27 BCM. Hydrogen in steel is mostly replacing coke at the moment. It's not replacing natural gas. So I think that's what we have to kind of really kind of keep in perspective. It's not that we are going to replace natural gas with hydrogen. And I think that's also not our objective. What our objective should be, and there I think we should think broader about just kind of getting rid of natural gas. We want to get rid of natural gas, but maintain our industry. And I think that's where hydrogen plays an important role, to have that ability to kind of have certain steel sectors, which are certain industrial sectors, which are reliant on natural gas, give them the opportunity to make that shift. And that, I think, is where the acceleration needs to take place. And that's what we all have to do together. It's interesting to see that, like in our analysis, for example, we see, I think you were talking about numbers, we see about 1.5 million tons in 2030. Now, if the industry says, actually, we can do 2 million tons, we can consume 2 million tons, I think we should try to make that happen. I think we really should think, okay, not only how can we make that happen in terms of production, so maybe can we initially do some hydrogen injection in existing blast furnaces to already have the production in place, and at the same time think with the industry, how can we make this transition happen as fast as possible? Which are the blast furnaces which we could initially already transfer to DRI, so that we then also think about the infrastructure being available to those particular plants. I don't think this is a crisis which anyone individually can solve. The Commission cannot do it. The European Parliament in itself cannot. We really have to work together to make this happen. And I think even though it's challenging times, I think for me, at least in our discussion, it becomes clear that we all need to work together to make this happen. And that in itself, I think, is an opportunity.
Bianca, let me get your response to that. Is that also how you see hydrogen's role for the steel sector? And then also, we had a couple questions from the audience who just wanted you to clarify the 2030 and 2050 figures that you gave out in terms of terawatts or terawatt hours. Could you give those figures again?
Sure. So I can start again with the numbers. 2030, we are talking about 2 million tons of hydrogen. For the production of this hydrogen, we will need 94 terawatt hour of electricity. On top of this, we need 75 terawatt hour of electricity. And this represents, for 2030, 165 terawatt hour of electricity. For 2050, we are talking about 5.5 million tons of hydrogen. To produce this hydrogen, we will need 234 terawatt hour of electricity and additional 165 terawatt hour of electricity for other purposes of the steel plants. And then coming back to what has been said, yes, what we see is that the crisis that we are facing, it's for sure a challenge, but it's also opportunity to speed up the hydrogen. This is no doubt about. The only point that I would like to a little bit clarify is that if we use hydrogen in blast furnaces, means that we also need to invest on infrastructure. The blast furnaces, they are not ready to receive hydrogen. You also need to construct pipelines to send this hydrogen to blast furnaces. So somehow we need to put all this efforts and all this funding needed in constructing direct reduction plants. So I can talk on behalf of ThyssenKrupp. What happened recently with this whole crisis, that we saw this as an opportunity actually to double our capacity of our direct reduction plant. So recently we redefined that for our first direct reduction plant, we're going for double of it. So including hydrogen in blast furnaces actually is not really the best solution. Is let's go for the direct reduction plants, let's put the infrastructure available for it, and the most important thing, most of all, let's make this regulation ready as soon as possible so legal certainty is there for us.
Catherine, I'd like to get your perspective on this. What do you see as the role of hydrogen here in the steel sector?
Yeah. First, if you allow me, I would like to comment on the question you raised before concerning the effects of the energy crisis that we see on hydrogen and hydrogen regulation, because I believe that it changes some of the fundamentals. We have different crises happening at the same time that put pressure. We have higher targets, but at the same time, we need to develop the infrastructure that we don't have to deliver the volumes we're talking about. So that also put pressure on the market itself that is still emerging. How do we cope with higher energy prices for the steel industry? And that includes as well higher energy prices for the production of hydrogen, and how that will be addressed for the steel sector. And here we need to already develop some instruments for that. That means financing instruments, but that means as well new purchase strategies for governments, but as well for companies, having different types of purchase mechanisms. So we start talking about hydrogen power purchase agreements, and therefore we need to also address that in that context. And that will also reshape the international competition on the commodity market at the global scale. And we see that, for example, under the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, they already have a clear strategy for that. And that will need to be accompanied by an external dimension of the EU energy policy, as well as rightly pointed out by Ruth. So that was one of the comments, and related to the effect on the steel sector. I do believe, as I mentioned, that it's something that needs to be addressed as well in terms of rentability. So how do you address the increase of those prices, but as well ensure that the benefits of using low carbon or renewable hydrogen will come forward, because that's also a question of industrialization of Europe, industrial policy in Europe. Thank you.
Well, we've heard mentioned several times two problems that we have right now, which is a lack of infrastructure and a lack of a market. So Jens, what do you think will be the key requirements for building a well-functioning hydrogen market that can actually get things moving here?
Yeah, I'm the rapporteur of the Parliament for the Gas Market Directive, and I hope that we develop the tools for that. So I was talking with a lot of investors in the last week who said, well, sorry to say, Ruth, but you know it from some other from some other discussions. I was told that with the regulation that was outlined by the Commission, there will be not so much investments, because the unbundling regulation that were proposed would force an investor to sell its network, his network, her network, after 10 years. And everybody told me that we will neither get the money back then nor get a fair price, because everybody knows that we have to sell. So what I try to do is take what we have on the existing gas market and mirror it exactly in the same way on the hydrogen market, so that every situation of unbundling that is due today in the member states can be used again to develop the hydrogen market. And that is something that at least get a positive response from the gas enterprises, saying, okay, this is a base which we can work, because we want to transform, we want to step up into hydrogen, we want to produce it, we want to transport it, and this is the way we want to do it. So up to now, I'm optimistic to say that all my shadow rapporteurs share this view, and there seems to be a majority behind that proposal, and we hope we keep that. We will be ready with the job in the beginning of 2023. So I think we could go to plenary in January, and then it depends how fast the council will be. But I'm optimistic that we have a working regulation ready in Brussels, then to be delivered to the member states, of course, but ready in Brussels in the first half of 23. And I get a lot of emails from managers of the gas enterprises, of the gas transport business saying, we are ready. We have money, we have manpower, we have skills, we are hiring people, we are outlining plans to build up the infrastructure. Where is it missing? And now let's give us the security of the regulation, and then we can start. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Ruud, let me get you to respond to that. Will the unbundling requirements discourage investment?
Of course, when we put these proposals forward, we do also do our impact assessment, so these do not come from anywhere. But I think that the broad principle that we're seeing here is that hydrogen, we don't have a hydrogen market yet. We simply don't have one. There is some merchant hydrogen which is through private pipelines, so we're creating something completely new, completely from scratch. And yes, it will compete, actually, especially if you start repurposing gas infrastructures. These are complex decisions. How are you going to decide whether an existing pipeline is going to be repurposed, or you're going to keep that pipeline to serve some of your existing customers? And we believe that the gas TSOs, as they have the capabilities. We don't disagree with that. They have the capabilities, they have the people, they've got the experience. What we want to make sure is that those decisions that are being made are for hydrogen and for the hydrogen market, and are not diluted within the company. And that's where the whole unbundling idea comes from. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to create something like this. We think that if we give the right signals from the start, that the industry will rise to that challenge. And if we have that principles in the beginning, then we can also really start with a fresh slate. Use the same people, use the same expertise, but really say, okay, this is a new market, let's build it from scratch. That's where the idea and the principles come from.
Rosa, how do you think we can create this hydrogen market, and what are really the requirements to make sure that it's a stable one?
I like very much, I think, what we just said regarding the signals to the market, in the sense that I think the signal is quite clear regarding the importance that hydrogen will have in the future. But we are still, and I just got the idea when preparing the panel from another Euractiv event that is happening, I think, next week, about critical raw materials. And I think that the discussion is not going as far as it should be, because we talk as hydrogen to be used, yeah, but where is this hydrogen going to come from? From electrolyzers. Where are the electrolyzers going to come from? From China? Are we creating a different dependence? So when talking before about using hydrogen for the security of supply, I think it has a role to play, not definitely in the short term, because we don't have it. It will have in the long term, and the signal from the policymakers is clear. Let's build this hydrogen economy. And I'm missing the supply chain development. We're still, unfortunately, don't have many manufacturers, integrators in Europe. And that's one of the things that is creating the more, let's say, a noise right now, although we don't hear it that often, maybe, because we have other problems to tackle right now. So this is, for me, maybe one of the key points. And the second also could be, and maybe this is also discussed very often regarding the country of origin. So it's interesting how I learned the other day that, for instance, in some parts of Switzerland, they were importing biomethane, and they didn't have a match between the country of origin in one system and another. So at the end, the customer was seeing it as natural gas. They couldn't certify that it was biomethane, but they are paying the premium for biomethane. So it's interesting how, unfortunately, we're still in this struggle of how we certify or don't certify. And still, with hydrogen, I think we are in the same discussion. And if we have not sorted out with biomethane, I'm not sure how far we can go with hydrogen in that respect.
So aside from market challenges, we also have infrastructure challenges. Jorge, let me go to you. We know that Southern Europe is going to have a big role in hydrogen production, and Spain in particular has been very focused on this, but we also see an interconnection problem between Spain and the rest of the EU. What will be Spain's role in particular in developing in hydrogen, and how do we fix these infrastructure bottlenecks that we've encountered? And do you think actually the new plan for MidCats, so the new MidCat alternative, is a step in the right direction?
Well, let me first, because I would like to point some comments and from a very practical or developing real projects perspective, what we were talking before about the markets and the hydrogen market and the ramp up. I think first there is no real market yet. We have to develop project. We have to start building the project. So I think it is key that, as I was saying, the delegated act is defined the sooner the better to start seeing hydrogen as a reality in certain projects. I think that these first years, how we implement the subsidy scheme is going to be key. I mean, we have to make an efficient and realistic implementation of the subsidy scheme to make the real project happen. And we also need the fair play, talking about the market, and we need that the same conditions will be for all the players, because there is a lot of new players, new entrants on these hydrogen markets. So having said that, I think it's key that we need also to develop the hydrogen economy, as it was stated right now by Rosa. This is key. I mean, and this is what we are doing. We need to have all the equipment, and we need to have the capability to build all this equipment specifically inside our countries. And so talking about specifically in Spain, I think there is a great opportunity for our country. We have a lot of technical companies that can create the key elements. As I was saying, we have, for example, an agreement with Cummins that is going to build in Spain a factory for producing 50 megawatt a year of electrolyzers to move to 1 gigawatt. And we have very good relations with other parts of the key bottlenecks part for developing real projects like compressors and so on. So I think in Spain we have a good opportunity. Of course, we have a huge resource of renewables. So we have the technical capacity. We have companies that are willing to pay and invest on hydrogen, and companies that are willing to invest on decarbonization of their own products. But at the end, we need to move forward on these other steps. So first years, we need to implement the subsidy scheme the better the possible and as soon as possible. We need to define regulation, and we need to work on the value chain.
Catherine, I know you have to leave shortly, so I want to put one question to you on green hydrogen. At what point will we be able to have completely CO2-free or fossil fuel-free hydrogen? How far away are we from that? And is it really a very long-term perspective, or is it something that can be accomplished in the short term?
Oh, that's a very difficult question to answer, but from the legal or regulatory side, I would say it very much depends on what kind of objective you have and what kind of criteria do you lay down at different levels. For example, we're talking about the steel industry. It could be related as well to public procurement rules. You have concrete criteria for the purchase of the different materials that will rely as well on hydrogen based on renewable energy production. It will be also a question of standardization, and we have a wide work on standardization that has started already at the international level, but as well under the Renewable Energy Directive 2, the RED 2, and both the international standards and the SEN standards. And the valorization as well of renewable hydrogen, as was mentioned, through the guarantees of origin. In the meantime, that's sure that we need to develop the necessary volumes, and the carbon footprint of hydrogen will be key to that. So once again, the quality criteria for hydrogen, and that will go probably through developing the market by developing low carbon hydrogen and making sure that we pursue the path towards renewable hydrogen. And that will be through all these different tools related to the commodity criteria that I mentioned.
I want to stay with this theme of green hydrogen and green steel because most of the audience questions are actually on that topic. So this first question from the audience I'm going to put to Ruud. The question is from Alex Barnes. Repower EU expects that half of renewable hydrogen to be imported by 2030 is 10 megatons, but that is expensive and difficult. LNG is 160 OC, I'm not sure, but liquid hydrogen is 253 OC. Steel is easier to transport. Won't industry move to areas with lots of cheap renewables instead?
The 10 million tons of imports, what we put in the Repower EU, responds to actually one of the previous questions in terms of the geopolitics. Yeah, I think, yes, we are importing, yes, we have a target for renewable hydrogen imports. Again, it's relatively small in terms of what we need for 2050. So we're really talking here not only about addressing kind of the natural gas challenge with Russia, but positioning Europe globally in this whole energy transition. And I think that's an important message that we're bringing with this 10 million tons. It's not just Europe, it's us together which have to do this energy transition. And that is actually the response to the question, will the steel industry move outside of Europe? Of course, my answer is, I hope not. I mean, this is why we do these targets. This is why we have ambitious targets for 2030. That's why we have a specific target for industry. Because what we want to make sure is that green hydrogen, renewable hydrogen that we are producing here today in Europe, and let's face it, in terms of plants, we are still the world leader, that is available in Europe for our industry. That's why we target the industry. Now, thinking long term, yes, certainly there will be new industries popping up in terms of where renewable electricity is cheap and available. But let's also think about what our European electricity system look like. Today, actually, we are the highest in terms of integrating solar and wind, variable renewables into our electricity system. So yes, you might have a country like Saudi Arabia, which has very cheap solar PV, but do they have the capability to create an electricity system as a whole that is completely decarbonized and integrate high shares of solar and wind into the system? I think there actually we have a competitive advantage. We have 10, 15 years of that experience. We have electricity regulation and rules. We have flexibility which is coming into the system. So that package as a whole, I think, it should be attractive for industry, because we're not only kind of creating now this renewable hydrogen, but if you look at the carbon neutral economy, we can deliver an energy system that can be the basis for industry, and I think that's our competitive advantage.
Bianca, what would you say about this idea that the industry would move to areas with lots of cheap renewables?
Oh, hopefully not, no. We want them to stay in Europe. I think that's the overall challenge that we have, but also opportunity, and that's what we are really fighting for, that the steel industry really remains in Europe. That's why we are here today, and I think the steel industry has put a lot of efforts in the direction to decarbonize and really have those projects and be part and surf the wave of decarbonizing and really be the front runners and really be the big exporters of these technologies for the future. So I think this is the role we want to play.
I want to put the next question to Jorge. So this question is again sticking on this theme of green hydrogen. So the question is from Jan Bolin from ArcelorMittal. Availability of massive amounts of green hydrogen is required to abate the iron steelmaking emissions. Will it require the steel sector to relocate some activities closer to H2-rich geographies, or can H2 be transported to current assets competitively? I think we were talking about this a little bit before. If Spain is an H2-rich geography, would you expect that steel plants need to move closer to Spain?
Well, I mean, I don't know much about the plans that the steel industry may have. What is true is that, fortunately in Spain we have a good resource for renewables, so cheap price. and also we have a strong network. I mean, so the ability to put all this energy on the network. So I think there could be an opportunity inside the European Union producing green hydrogen and using carriers inside the European Union. So I think that this project that the industry is looking at, and we see that from as a Spanish renewable producer, there is a lot of companies that want to think on Spain as a producer of green hydrogen and use carriers, green ammonia, green methanol, or whatever, to export to some other parts of Europe where new infrastructure for cracking or whatever will be there installed. So yes, I think there can be an opportunity, not maybe for industry that they are based in other country to come to Spain, but also to consider Spain as a country that may export in a way inside the European Union our cheaper and available renewable energy.
Jens, let me put this question to you as well. Do you think it will be necessary to move some production closer to the H2, or can we get the H2 to where the facilities already are?
In the beginning, I think we can put the hydrogen to the facilities, given we have enough infrastructure. I'd like to point out that there are already a lot of pipelines coming in from North Africa. So also the Maghreb countries, who are our direct neighbors in terms of Morocco and Spain, very close neighbors. We are already connected with them. So when we can make this pipelines hydrogen ready, it would be possible to transport green hydrogen from renewable energy resources in North Africa. And that would also give these countries an economic perspective. Okay, you cannot rule out that sooner or later the production would follow the prices, but this is something we have to in our hands politically, that we play out the advantages that we have, and colleagues have pointed out several of them. And finally, well, I mean, if we keep the rest of the production chain here, it is not so much damaging that in 20 years you probably build up steel production facilities in North Africa. I mean, we in the industrial hearts of Europe, we deal with the situation that industry changes since it began all the time, and we managed to do that. So I mean, I'm coming from the Ruhr area. Duisburg is part of my constituency. The steel mill there from ThyssenKrupp is still the biggest in Europe, and of course I want to keep it. That's what I'm working for. But when we have hydrogen, we have to face a situation that probably energy-intensive industry is at least tempted to go there where the energy is even cheaper. But this is something we can manage, and we can cope with the situation, and we can play out the advantages that Europe has when it comes to investment decisions. So I'm not very concerned.
Catherine, I understand you can stay a bit later, which is great, and you wanted to come in on this point as well?
Yes, it's. I would like to comment as well. Something that has not been raised before is we're talking here about imports huge volumes, but for developing also a supply for the local industries, we will need smaller projects, and it's fundamental to reach those two levels, to have both small project at the local level, but at as well the big volumes that will be imported through terminals, through pipelines, through ship. So and that requires a minimum of coordination and locating them close to industries, yes, and something that is very much welcome in the package, in the hydrogen and low and decarbonized gases package, is the emphasis on planning and coordinated planning, also in the perspective of the energy system integration. Just to have these two approach in mind, I think it's very fundamental, and coordinated approach, integrated planning processes.
Well, Rosa, I'd like to put the next question to you. This question is from Mauricio Belaunde from Agora Energiewende. Loose production criteria for grid-connected renewable hydrogen production would lead to increased gas consumption in the power system. How can we reconcile a transition phase for hydrogen production with our efforts to reduce gas consumption? Do you think there's a risk that we drive up gas consumption in the short term by building infrastructure for hydrogen?
There is always a risk, isn't it? I think we are actually discussing now about imports as well. There is a risk that companies may go. I think we all saw the announcement yesterday from BASF CFO. I think that was quite a message that they were giving us. So we do have a risk, but I think that's why we have people at the Commission of the Parliament. They are working on this package. They are working on different other legislative proposals. So when we talk about the package, we talk about gas and hydrogen decarbonized market, but we have so many other legislative proposals. We have RED II, we have the energy system integration, and when you really get into the topic, and I have been here in Brussels only 3 years, so I'm not, even in 3 years, you don't have the time to get really deep into the topic, you realize that they are really trying to make coherence out of everything to avoid this risk. Because we are, I think it was said before, we are the front runners, you know, in I think, honestly, in sustainability, in climate goals, in ambition, and that ambition is giving the right signal to the market. But at the same time, we will request our partners out there that they also fulfill the same conditions that we are fulfilling, because we don't want our industry to be seen as uncompetitive. We don't want this unfair advantage that others may have in other places where even human rights are not respected. So there is always a risk, but I think we all, and this is why I was talking before about this awareness of the communities. We talk a lot about hydrogen now, but what about solar, right? It was the big thing 10 years ago, and many people didn't believe that we will have solar PVs in our rooftops. Even in my own family, it took me 5 years to convince them to put solar panels in their rooftop, even though I'm an engineer and they pay for that degree, because they didn't believe that could work. Can you imagine? So the people out there, they really need to understand that this is a cooperation with them, and not that we are just increasing prices because we want, but because we are going through a transition. And it might hurt at some point. I think we are all suffering a little bit lately, but we will get there, and it will be better for all of us because we will have a better world. But of course, there will be risk, and we have to face them and mitigate them the best possible way.
Well, the next question from the audience is for Bianca. This comes from Federico from Sandbag. Wouldn't circular steelmaking be useful to reduce the huge need of green hydrogen? Does ThyssenKrupp have commitments or targets on EAF steelmaking using scrap? What are the policy incentives and disincentives?
Yeah, in the case of ThyssenKrupp, actually, we work with what we call the blast furnace route, not the EAF route. So actually, this is in the steel world, I would say, you have those two routes. So what we are doing as ThyssenKrupp, we are committed also, as I was saying, to this 2045 target to reduce our emissions. We have a 2030 target. Actually, 2045, we want to be carbon neutral. 2030, we have a 30% CO2 emission reduction target. And our strategy is to decommission our 4 blast furnaces and implement direct reduction plants. So the 2 first direct reduction plants will come until 2030, and the other 2 until 2045. So this is our current strategy. Again, we don't go in the EAF route.
Okay, so the next question is for Ruud. This question comes from Karsten Browns. What is the state of play in applying carbon contracts for difference in the EU steel industry?
So in our proposals for the Innovation Fund and the use of the Innovation Fund, we have indeed both options there. And I think it's positive from the European Parliament, etc., from the Council that will be approved. So that indeed would then allow us to use those innovation funds to do those kind of essentially financing mechanisms. Now, in anticipation, we've already started So already at the beginning of the year, we are working with a big consultancy firm, etc., to see what is the design, what should the design of these contracts for difference and carbon contracts for difference look like. It's important to understand that a contract for difference or carbon contract for difference provides financing for projects or for industry, etc. Similar as we're doing right now in the Innovation Fund directly for project financing. So you really have to compare, okay, what are the advantages and disadvantages there? Now for contracts for difference, it's about competition. You really can compete on price. And so we do believe that contracts for difference options are complementary to what we're already doing to really get that price discovery. Now, carbon contracts for difference is another mechanism again, but that really focuses on the industry. So saying, okay, you're an industry, you have a carbon price, give us decarbonization solutions for the cheapest cost per mitigated ton of CO2. So again, these different kind of mechanisms are complementary to each other. Now, we hope that if the regulation is being approved, and based on the work that we've been doing right now at the moment, that by the end of 2023, we should be able to do the first kind of contracts for difference for particularly hydrogen already. So this is a big if everything works all right, but that's indeed what we're working towards.
Okay, so there are two related questions here for Jorge. The first question is from Erwin Cornelis from ECOS. We need to speed up hydrogen production. Will we succeed in speeding the renewable energy capacity alongside? So will the effort, particularly in Spain, to increase the renewables capacity go along with the pace that we need hydrogen to be generated? And second question is from Rachel Burnett from Montel News. When might we see the first green hydrogen exports from Spain?
Well, I think the renewable capacity growth, at least in Spain, is very important. So I think that we have renewable energy enough for what our plans for green hydrogen are placed in our roadmap in Spain. Our roadmap in Spain is very much focused on hydrogen applications for replacing gray hydrogen, and some schedule for some part of it for mobility. So, I mean, we have a very ambitious plan for growth on renewables in Spain. So, I mean, this is not going to be an issue, and we will have new additional, because this is key for us to understand that we need additional energy for renewable energy, new additional energy to produce the hydrogen that is inside our roadmap for our country. In relation with exporting hydrogen, I mean, it's a matter of make it happen. Of course, it's a big puzzle. You need a lot of things to work together. You need someone outside Spain with the willingness to pay all the logistics. Of course, ammonia can be a carrier that may happen quicker than developing some infrastructure, because of course there are already logistics implemented in some areas in Spain, in some areas in Europe. So Haber-Bosch is a mature technology. Once you have the hydrogen developed, turning into ammonia and exporting can be something that can happen quicker. So I think this could be a very interesting opportunity. The renewables are there. In Spain, I think last year we have like 48% penetration of renewables. So I mean, we're talking about big percentages already, and with a huge growth, especially on photovoltaics.
So the next question is for Bianca. The question is from Jean-Marie Mitzi. Any opinion on the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act that is already offering a warranted support mechanism for up to $4.50 per kilogram of green hydrogen for 10 years to project starting by the end of 2032? Is there any equivalent in the EU, or should there be?
I think the NRA is somehow a wake-up call for us, given the pragmatic approach that the US is taking on this file. So for us, this shows that we also need to take a pragmatic approach here in Europe, and we need to get this regulation ongoing and as pragmatic, as clear as possible. We need to bear in mind that this regulation, for instance, for imports of hydrogen, will also need to be fulfilled by somewhere outside Europe, right? So this also means that more complex, less hydrogen, and not so quick the ramp up will happen. For us as the steel industry, we are really talking about time. Time for us is the most precious things that we have right now. So the NRA shows that a pragmatic approach there is a way, having a pragmatic approach. Let's look at it and see as an opportunity also for us. Let's be pragmatic. Let's make as simple as possible, not so complex, and let's start it. So I think the NIA somehow helps us.
Ruud, is this possible for the EU to do?
No, we can't do tax credits. It's as simple as that. And I think the one thing I've learned from the IRA is that we have to do a lot on communication. Because I think in the European Commission, the framework that we're putting in place is more complex. You've been studying it for 3 years now, but it's comprehensive. And so if I compare the IRA now with what we have in place in the European Commission, then I see two things. First of all, yes, the IRA sets a threshold of 4 kilos of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen. Are you above that? Then you're out. If you're below that, you're in. We have exactly the same policy already since 2018, except we don't have 4, but 3.4 kilos of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen. So actually, we are there, I would say, ahead. Then secondly, how is the IRA going to calculate what are the life cycle emissions of that hydrogen to give the $3? That's not developed yet. So they're now starting a public consultation. Well, we've had already a public consultation. We've had these discussions with industry. It's just a matter of getting to that final part. But again, there, I think we are ahead. Now then the third bit, and that's of course a difference, is we don't do and we can't do tax credits. So there they have in the policy system an advantage in that they can give a project certainty that if they receive certain criteria, that they receive a certain tax credit. On the other hand, if I look at the IPCEIs that we have now, the RRF, etc., and I add up the budgets that we have already there, not even talking about the European Hydrogen Bank or the innovation funds that we have, we're actually well ahead of what at least the US is expecting to hand out to hydrogen producers in the EU. So I think we have all of the elements here. And we have excellent people working on developing those projects. So yes, it's important to have that competition, but I do think that also from our side, we have to do more in terms of communication, because I do think that we are still ahead.
Next question, again from Federico at Sandbag. I'm going to put this to Jens first. Should hydrogen be included in the carbon border adjustment mechanism as the Parliament has proposed?
Well, we had a majority in the Parliament when we lined out the hydrogen strategy for a formula saying let's support the green hydrogen and let's not let's not discriminate the blue one, and that comes from the idea that we probably are better off when we ramp up hydrogen technology as soon as possible, even when we are not having enough green electricity to run the electrolyzers. The other way around would mean that we postpone the ramp up of the hydrogen for 10 years at least, until we have enough green energy. And I think we will always be energy importers as Germans, as EU, as Europeans all together. And because of that, I don't think that hydrogen should be subject of the CBAM.
Bianca, what's your take on this?
Well, I would say as Eurofair, we don't have a position on this one. I would say, yeah, at least to my knowledge. So I would prefer to pass the question, I would say.
Rosa, what about you? Good idea or bad idea?
I think you're right. I think that's my personal opinion on that. I think, but we already have the discussion about the colors for so long, right? So I tend to avoid the word green or blue or gray or pink or yellow, trying to talk about renewable, but then people are like, what do you mean by renewable? But I have also been working in the gas sector, and we also have the same discussion about what is a sensitive user to gas quality, right? So I think it's a discussion that we will never solve. But so far, what is the purpose, right? I think this is what we are focusing, what we should never forget. What is the purpose? Is decarbonization? Yes, but it's also not at whatever cost. I heard some comments around from some other panels. I mean, there is a panel every day, right? So, but yet, if you just keep track, that they say, okay, we have to be green, even if that means paying 3 times more. And I do not agree with that. I would say, yes, definitely, I wanna keep I mean, as a young energy professional, I wanna keep the climate. I want to have a future. But we also have to take care that we are not putting too many restrictions maybe on how we decarbonize that. So I would say that at least the arguments brought forward, they make sense for me, but of course not an expert on CBAM. So.
And finally, Ruud, how does the Commission feel about including hydrogen in CBAM?
Yes, of course, we didn't introduce it in the proposal, so we have a clear view on that. And actually that view is a pragmatic view, in that we said the CBAM in general protects our industry, but of course, to be pragmatic, it has to cover those products which are traded. Steel is traded, ammonia is traded, aluminium is traded, electricity is traded, and they're clear, simple products. So that's where the CBAM works there. Of course, we're going to develop over time. This is a new instrument, so that's also to keep something in mind. Now, one of the other pieces which is still missing is the certification both for renewable and low carbon hydrogen. Of course, once the criteria is there, that can be implemented actually quite rapidly because we have all of the processes in place to implement that certification. But that also would mean that if we then get imports of renewable and low carbon hydrogen, we would exactly know the CO2 content of that hydrogen. So there we have a mechanism in place to track that CO2 content of hydrogen. Now, there is a possibility that we start importing or trading grey hydrogen. But that, I think, is a small possibility. I don't know if that is going to happen or not. If that would happen, then, of course, I think you get into a situation where you can say, okay, imported grey hydrogen would be competing with renewable and low-carbon hydrogen. But only in that situation, I think, it would make sense to act. And all of the other occasions, I think, through steel, we've already covered it. Through ammonia, we've already covered. So we're ready there.
Yeah, this issue of certification is one I think that's come up several times today. Well, that's all the time we have for today's discussion. I want to thank the panelists, both here and online, for some excellent contributions. I think what's clear is we are in a brave new era when it comes to hydrogen. And the current geopolitical situation is obviously affecting the drive for this right now, that it's renewed in focus, but of course hydrogen has been in focus for a while now here in the EU. The question is, how do we build the infrastructure and the market to make it happen? I think we've heard a lot of very interesting ideas today, so certainly plenty to think over. So now I would like to invite the people in the room for a networking reception afterwards. And for those of you watching online, I invite you to have an excellent lunch in your home or office or wherever you are. We'll see you right back here for the next Your Active Debate. Take care.